heart was throbbing in the sunlight of my Colleen's smile. In all my dreams I hear her sweet voice falling soft and low. I know she's waiting where we said.
In the early 1950s, most people were going to films as entertainment, films and dances. And at the time, The Quiet Man was booming here, the showing of it, almost every cinema in the country. And I got an idea that I would go into the film business. And after making a number of inquiries about projectors, I bought the second-hand projector and decided on starting to show films. I had a part of the building, the premises where I walked, and we converted it into about 100-seater little cinema. And we started to show films on one night a week and 2 nights. We were into the film at weekends for Friday and Sunday nights. And ran the show, started to learn about projecting, and did an opening show, and the admission price, I always think of it, was 1 6 and 9 pence. The news started to get round, and I was invited to other places. Small little places. You remember that all the big towns, they had their own cinemas, and it was difficult to get any good place where there was a big population that you could show them. We were left with all the small little villages, in other words. So I thought it might be a paying proposition if I went into it as a business, but it was slow, very slow, to get people to go. And then I decided on buying a movie camera. And I thought, well, if the people didn't come in to see the films, they might come in if they were the stars themselves. By having them up there on the screen doing whatever they were doing in their shops or in their fields or going to mass or whatever they were doing, if they looked at themselves, they were enthused and they were delighted, and they told somebody else, and the business started to grow then.
These were the years of the vanishing Irish, particularly the rural Irish. Dr. Lucy, Bishop of Cork, declared, "Rural Ireland is stricken and dying, and the will to marry and live off the land is gone." The 1951 census showed the first increase in population since 1841, despite the fact that 25,000 emigrated every year between 1946 and 1951. By 1956, the population had declined to the lowest level ever recorded, and the rate of emigration had risen to 40,000 a year. By 1957, the rate of emigration and the birth rate were running neck and neck. Does hindsight make the 50s bleaker? Well, this is how the Connaught Telegraph bade farewell to 1957.
It is gone, and may all our bad luck go with it. It was gloomy and depressing, with an average of 60,000 unemployed every week, while emigration took as big a toll as ever of the cream of the youth.
It was also a time of great simplicity and of great mobility for anyone who could lay his hands on a pound. If you had a pound, you could travel. For instance, half of it took you on a day trip to Salthill. The other half provided enough of whatever you fancied. A week here during race week would be the equivalent of the present-day fortnight in Torremolinos. But pounds were hard to come by, and even in Salthill, the liner in the bay was a reminder of those who had gone and those who were soon to follow. Things were not what they used to be, of course, not even St. Patrick's Day. So said one local paper in 1958.
Instead of being a day of rejoicing, of pride, and of intense patriotism, instead of being an Irish Ireland Day in the true sense of the phrase, St. Patrick's Day has been a dull, listless, and uninspiring day for the youth, and one of sad, nostalgic yearning for the aged.
These formal occasions indicated who was who in order of respect. The clergy were certainly at the top of the first division. There seemed to be thousands of them, not forgetting the legions who were guarding our spiritual empire beyond the sea. It was during the 50s that the Catholic Church in Ireland tried to mould the state in its own image, socially and morally. It peppered the faithful with pastorals and lectured the politicians publicly while twisting their arms privately. When the first attempt to liberalise the Sunday drinking hours failed, the hierarchy in 1950 drew attention to ecclesiastical law on Sunday opening and said, so long as this ecclesiastical law remains, it would be sinful to agitate for their opening. In other words, it would be sinful to make a case for Sunday opening. The pubs were still a male preserve and country places. The maid's place was behind the bar, serving. But the lounge bar was the coming thing in the towns, and there were tales of girls home from England convincing their friends that gin and lime induced frigidity in women, and young fellows telling their friends that it induced the opposite, and there resulted great confusion. It was still the age of the bona fide traveller, who travelled 3 miles from where he last slept and was legally entitled to drink after normal closing time and on Sundays. The bona fide traveller entered boldly through the front door. The knowledgeable local slipped in quietly at the back. Employment and industry was as scarce as hen's teeth in the West. An extension such as this one at the Castlebar Bacon Factory was an occasion for much speech-making about how the curse of emigration was being lifted and the flow of precious young blood being staunched. The politicians claimed credit, the church blessed, and the rest looked and listened and thought their own thoughts. Politics had been enlivened in the late 40s and 50s by the arrival of Connaught. People spoke of moulds being broken and new horizons being scanned. And whether most people believed that it was true, many wanted to believe it. At least it was a change. But at this time, Mayo was a 3-party county. There was Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and Connaught. This was a strange West of Ireland manifestation that waxed in the 40s, waned in the 50s, its tail end being swallowed by Fine Gael in the 60s. With the words of the pastorals ringing in their ears, the youth of the countryside went away. They had been well warned against socialism, company keeping, Sunday drinking, dancing after midnight and immodesty in dress, as well as more exotic depravities such as mixed marriages, reading filthy pagan literature, particularly by Irish authors, and what a religious pamphleteer of the day described as this violent spasm of pleasure, presumably outside of any kind of marriage at all. Indeed, they were told they would be better off staying at home than venturing out into what was a stormy ocean of vice and communism. What they were to do at home, apart from loving Ireland, was not clear, but at least they would remain pure. Above all else, the church demanded obedience. Everyone from the Taoiseach to the High Infant and National School was expected to be obedient, do what they were told and ask no awkward questions. The great virtue was obedience, and the great vice was impurity. It was even worse than communism, but there were not unrelated vices. Compared to what the emigrant would find in Crewe, Coventry or Cricklewood, the decadence of Bal, Ballina, Ballinrobe and Bohola was only in its infancy. Our pamphleteer warned,
Happier 1,000 times is the beggar shivering in his rags at the street corner if his heart be pure, than the millionaire rolling by in his car if he be impure.
but there was also life and gaiety, even in politics of a certain kind. Under Ross Thoilson, the country's first big bicycle race was known as republicanism on wheels. Even to view it as it whizzed past seemed close to being sworn into something dangerous and forbidden. The decade gave its name to yet another campaign to free Ireland by force. There were huge funerals, denunciations from leaders of church and state, the internment camp at the Connaught was reopened, and those with long memories seemed to recollect that the gun had been taken out of Irish politics in 1949 with the passing of the Republic of Ireland Act. There were more orthodox ways of serving Ireland in arms. An Fórsa Cosanta Áitiúil, the FCA, was a colourful and impressive addition to any parade or ceremonial occasion. The inevitable begrudgers called it the Free Clothing Association, but it was encouraged for many reasons, most of which had nothing to do with militarism. Young men, and women too, were at this time encouraged to be gregarious. There was safety in numbers, and unquestioning obedience was bound to be as good for the soul as drilling and route marches were for the body. The motherland calls us, and we should work for her until she is freed from sea to sea. The speaker was a churchman, but he could have been a politician. The content of such speeches was not meant to be scrutinised. It would have been an act of unthinkable bad manners to ask, "What is the motherland saying?" or "Where is the work and we'll do it?" And as for being free, that was something that had to be said, because everyone really agreed with the sentiment, even those who were not free to enjoy themselves as they wished, without a strong safety net of constraint. Looking back on it now, one of the most striking things about social life in the 50s is that large numbers of people travelled long distances frequently. Public transport actually existed in rural Ireland then, although it was under constant attack for being erratic and inefficient. In 1957, it was estimated that between 70 and 80,000 pilgrims climbed Croagh Patrick, and a Sunday pilgrimage to Knock would attract about 45,000. This on the evidence of a publican whose business was affected by the erection of a fence across a right-of-way to his bar. The lowest attendance at an All-Ireland football final during the 50s was 62,000, and the highest 87,000. The agricultural show, with displays of fruit, vegetables, crafts and show jumping, drew crowds in summer and autumn. In summer also, the carnival and the ubiquitous marquee moved from town to town, and the crowds followed. It was reported that 7,000 turned up to hear Bridie Gallagher sing at Castlebar Carnival in the 5,000 square foot marquee. During Lent, when dancing was forbidden, wholesome activities such as the concert, variety show, question time and dramatic presentation, home-produced and touring, entertained the people. The radio was the constant source of entertainment all year round, and the GAA's activities extended over 11 months of the year. The GAA was badly affected by emigration, particularly at senior club level. In 1958, for instance, because of problems created by emigration, Claire Morris found it increasingly difficult to field a senior team and asked to be regraded junior. If the present state of affairs continues, said an official, there will be more GAA clubs in London than in rural Ireland. But all was not death and decay. If it was McHale Park in June or July, it was Purcell and Stockwell, Jerry O'Malley and Aidan Brady, Nace O'Dowd, Willie Casey or Patsy McGarty, or any of the others who brought 3 All-Irelands and 3 Railway Cups to Connaught when there was little else to shout about. There was also the voice of the 50s on Sunday afternoons, Michael O'Hare, as indeed it was the voice of the 30s and 40s. For these sounds, many a high aerial was rigged in Britain, for these were the authentic sounds of home, as no other sounds were. Between summer and Christmas, and again between Christmas and summer, one was clearly aware of the missing generation. There were the old, the middle-aged, and the very young, and very few of those in between. One heard little about stress and strain. Prayer helped to reassure and calm the mind. Valium had not yet crossed the Shannon, but there were large advertisements in the local papers for Buckfast tonic wine made by the Benedictine monks of Buckfast Abbey.
A pleasant glass or two keeps you toned up and is especially valuable when you're feeling run down.
Some prayed for vocations. Many a mother, when her sleep was broken at night, prayed that her young lad in Jarlath's or Nathie's or Murradecks would make it safely to Maynooth, and greater things, God willing, in the palace in Tuam, a Conry or Killala. Confirmation was the first real step towards growing up. You were dressed in new clothes from the skin out, examined by the bishop in person, if the teacher thought you bright enough not to disgrace himself in the school, and were even asked to take the pledge against drink until you were 18. You also sat through a sermon which, more often than not, was meant for older ears. Archbishop Walsh of Tuam, considered mild by comparison with some of his contemporaries, directed most of his arrows at late-night dancing. He once issued a special pastoral to point out clearly that when he said midnight, he meant 12 o'clock official summertime and not later. People were asked to make sacrifice that would bring a sinner back to penance, or give strength to a young man in Poland or Czechoslovakia to stand firm and shed his blood for the faith. The Corpus Christi procession brought out the best in the local reporters.
It was an edifying and impressive sight, and a magnificent act of public faith and honour to the King of Kings. The streets of the town were beautifully decorated. Beautiful altars were erected in shop fronts, doorways, windows or private houses, and along the processional way. Scenes of great devotion were manifest.
The reports bore a remarkable similarity to those of the previous and following years. In the procession, the sexes were segregated. The children of Mary, in their mantles of blue, marched in a solid phalanx of purity, described by our pamphleteer as the Queen of Heaven's special soldiers, pledged above all others to her service and defence, the personal bodyguard of the virtue she particularly loves and typifies. In the growing fight against paganism, the children of Mary have a special mission, the preservation of modesty as a powerful bulwark against all attacks upon the sixth commandment. From the point of view of structure and discipline, it was good to enlist the faithful in confraternities, sodalities, pioneers and other groupings. On ceremonial occasions, the absent ones, who had not emigrated, were doubly conspicuous. But the ceremonial was enjoyed by all. It was the community at prayer in a different way. And in the days before the Tidy Towns competition, the preparations for the annual procession also served to clean and beautify the towns of Ireland at the beginning of summer. Depression and emigration seemed to strengthen the feeling of community endeavour in rural Ireland. The village or parish sports was another great annual community occasion. There were competitions for the very young and very old, and for everyone in between. The tug of war did not always stop at tugging, and very often developed into local warfare, with the backers of the respective teams acting as initiators of objections and counter-objections. It was believed that the evil of gambling contributed to these occasional outbursts of violence, so alien, every good citizen agreed, to our great Irish tradition of non-violence, or at least neutrality. But most people agreed that it was all great fun, and made people look forward even more to the return bout at the neighbouring parish sports, as well as providing another topic for disputation in the pub afterwards. In the forefront of the fight to keep rural Ireland sober and free in theory, and drinking illegally in fact, were the pioneers, but they finally lost the fight to prolong the life of the bona fide traveller. Feats of strength were always appreciated in Ireland, and for this reason the tug of war has never lost its popularity. It was men like these who helped build the flattened cities of Britain after the war. They worked for MacAlpine and Wimpey before the Murphys and the MacNicholases clawed their way up through the hierarchy of British contractors. Their strength of character stood to them as much as their physical strength. They brought honour to their native place and showed that they were well equipped to survive and thrive without benefit of incessant sermons about their frailty. dancing and the dancehall were central to social life. In Mayo, they danced to the music of Brose Walsh, the Moy Rhythm Orchestra, P.J. Durkin, P.J. Gill, and many other combinations, with visits from Mick Delahunty or the Flying Carltons. But dancing was also an occasion of sin, and the journey home afterwards fraught with peril. An earlier Archbishop of Tuam had said,
"In recent years, the dangerous occasions of sin have been multiplied. The old Irish dances had been discarded for foreign importations which, according to all accounts, lent themselves not so much to rhythm as to low sensuality. Company keeping under the stars had superseded in too many places to the good old Irish custom of visiting, chatting and storytelling from one house to another, with the rosary to bring all home in due time."
Another bishop advised fathers, "If your girls don't obey you, if they are not in at the hours appointed, lay the lash upon their backs." Even when the clergy had outlawed kitchen and crossroad dances and shepherded the faithful into parochial halls, the suspicion remained. A popular Catholic Truth Society pamphlet of the time was entitled "The Devil at Dances." Small wonder then that about this time the devil was rumoured to have appeared in a Mayo dance hall. Even though this particular old Nick existed only in the imagination of the opposition, he caused a sensation at the time. But compared to the ferocity of the language used to condemn them, these dances were innocence personified and were conducted with decorum and dignity. The Connaught Telegraph at this time also lamented the passing of the traditional feis. Owing to lack of support, Castlebar Feis, one of the oldest and at one period the greatest in Ireland, has not been held this year. It is really a pity because, apart from language and cultural points of view, Feisina provided the only medium through which our youth, particularly the poor and rural children, could give expression in public to their talents. But more than the feis was passing, the once substantial Mayo Gaeltacht, despite the philanthropy of the newly appointed Minister for the Gaeltacht, himself a Mayo man, was breaking up and melting away into little pockets. At a public meeting, a man from the Rossport Gaeltacht of North Mayo said that more than 80 men from the area had emigrated in 1 week, and a teacher from the same place went to jail in protest at the state of the roads. There were also reports of small meetings of a new organisation called, rather quaintly some thought, Comhaltas Ceoltóirí Éideann. One Westport man predicted that it would eventually sweep all before it, but no one else seemed to share either his foresight or his optimism. Most saw the decline of the feis as the end of something, another full stop on the road to nowhere. The films of P.J. Gilmore give a unique glimpse of life in the west of Ireland in the 50s. The seeds of change must also have been there, but they were not visible. It seemed that rural Ireland was doomed, that the towns would decay and the snipe would have the land. With hindsight, we know that free second-level education would come, that industry would be fostered and emigration slowed down, that television would bring sex to Ireland, and that the devil would forsake the dance hall and take up residence in the corner of the living room. With hindsight, all is clear. It is chastening to remember that at the time, the future did not look like that at all.